We've got a great speaker trio coming at us today from the founders of the Tucson Agenda, which is a new media newsroom. And we have journalists Hank Stevenson, Caitlin Schmidt, and Kurt Pendergast. And they have created the Tucson Agenda.
Unfortunately, Joe, Caitlin wasn't able to make it today, so.
Okay, well, she's here in spirit. So we have the daily Substack newsletter for the Tucson region. Having previously found success with the Arizona Agenda, which covers Arizona state politics and policy, the team seeks to fill the local reporting gap in our cities, towns, and rural areas left by the hollowing out of local print newspapers and their newsrooms. They decided to start this new experiment in Tucson. We're gonna have a lively conversation. I'm sure we'll have lots of Q&A.
All right, well, thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate you and the invitation. We have 30 minutes to talk, which I could definitely talk for 30 minutes about this, but I don't know how tight it would be. This is we have a lot of passion behind this. But what I can do is kind of just lay out who we are and what we're doing. Hank can, do it for the Arizona Agenda as well. So what we are is we are a newsletter, right? So it's an email that arrives at your inbox 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. And we focus completely on, local government adjacent, that we call it, organizations and projects that get public funds. But we're hyper focused on the city of Tucson and Pima County. And so we give you like a daily dose of what's going on, what your elected officials are up to. And we also have a curated news section. So we kind of give you like what else is going on in the world, what are the stories that you're going to be seeing throughout the rest of the day. And that is basically the most basic I can describe it. Arizona, Hank, do you want to do the Arizona Agenda?
Sure. Yeah, we launched the Arizona Agenda about 2 years ago, actually just a little bit over 2 years ago. We just celebrated our second birthday in August. I started this organization with a co-founder named Rachel Leingang, who recently had her first baby and is moving back to the Midwest to be near her larger family. So we're looking to hire now. We started this with a grant, essentially, from Substack, which is a newsletter provider. It's a platform that their big claim to fame is making it really easy to subscribe to newsletters and create those direct connections between reporters or newsletter writers and their audience. And they were making a little bit of a foray into local news. And so they put up $1 million and gave grants to a dozen proposed newsletters worldwide. And we were one of them. And Rachel and I came up with a kind of a concept that we thought would work. And that was creating the kind of insider news that I like doing for, lobbyists, people who just live and breathe state politics, and mixing it with what she liked to do, which was a lot more explainer journalism, kind of breaking it down for the average person, a lot of solutions-based reporting, and a lot of like Q&As to kind of create what we call an insider publication for political outsiders. And so we launched that in August 2021. We had about enough money to guarantee that we could do it for a year, and we were sure that it would not succeed and that we would be begging for our old jobs back at the Gannett papers and stuff like that. And to our great surprise, it did wonderfully. By the first year, we were cracking $100,000 in revenue. We're close to $200,000 now, which, if you know what local reporters make at a corporate daily newspaper, $200,000 sounds like $1 billion to us. And that is so much more money than I ever expected that this could earn. And now we're, paying freelancers. We have some additional support staff that we take care of. We're looking to bring in a new partner to this organization, and we've kind of branched out into Tucson with Curtis and Caitlin Schmidt, who is a fantastic local reporter, been doing it for many years down there. And that is going incredibly well too. So far, I haven't looked at your numbers recently, Kurt,
Yeah.
but maybe you can tell people about where you are and where
Yeah.
you need to be to hit the sustainable level.
Yeah. So we didn't have $100,000 grant like the Arizona Agenda did. All right. So it's much scrappier on our end right now. But it's going remarkably well. I am absolutely amazed that we have like about 1,900 subscribers and we have about $53,000 in annual revenue already. And we just finished 2 months of publishing. So it's been, yeah, I can't say enough just how remarkable it's been that we just kind of, I got laid off from the Star, Caitlin quit from the Star, and we just kind of, launched this thing. And who knew we could be making this much money? But it's still not enough, right? We bought ourselves like a couple months of time to keep publishing, but we need to like essentially double that in order to have like a yearly sustainable income. So that is, as we go about the project of reporting as much news as we can, we also have to do this project of kind of like trying to fundraise and convince people to sign up and subscribe.
And the thing that like I find really exciting about this model, Kurt, Caitlin, Rachel, we've all worked in local news for, basically our entire careers. And I don't know how much y'all know about local newspapers, but they're not a great place to work. I was just talking to a local reporter today who is facing more furloughs at their organization, and that's a terrible way to live. And the economics of Substack really make launching a new kind of newsroom possible. What we're trying to create here is kind of a main flagship organization, the Arizona Agenda, with a lot of satellites. The Tucson Agenda being our first one, but we also think there's room for a market in Phoenix. We think that there's room for a market in Flagstaff, perhaps even rural Arizona, and get these kind of hyper local newsrooms rolling on their own, and also kind of feeding content to the Arizona Agenda where it makes sense and vice versa, and create something that doesn't exist right now, which is an employee owned, a journalist owned statewide newsroom. And really, it doesn't take that many subscribers to support something like this. And I think that there are enough people in Tucson, enough people in Arizona, enough people in Phoenix, Flagstaff, you name it, to support a small, scrappy operation that is doing kind of what the local newspapers used to really do as their bread and butter, which is local government and politics reporting. And that kind of thing has fallen off at a lot of the local dailies, even the good ones, because it's not the thing that necessarily drives the most clicks. It's not the flashiest, sexiest topics, but it is perhaps the most important thing that a newspaper or a news organization can be doing. So we're trying to step in and kind of fill the gaps that have been left behind, as the Star, the Republic, the Sun, you name it, continue to shrink and continue to put off kind of the most important work in our view that a newspaper can be doing, which is just reporting on their community. How are these decisions being made? How are your dollars being spent? Who is responsible for this major screw up? Those kinds of things are really what we're trying to focus on. And I think, Kurt, do you want to talk a little bit about just the format, the daily format?
Sure. Yeah. So So basically, what we try to do is we're trying to like every single day write something that is going to be interesting to you, at like super local, as local as possibly can be, and we're trying to like keep you as part of like a running conversation, right? Just like day after day after day. Like as it's done now, it seems to me like we have local reporting, but they're kind of like islands that are there's a lot of distance between each piece of reporting. But we used to have like I think about like the skinny in the Tucson Weekly years ago, how it was just kind of like it just every single day, boom, 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 pump it out. And you would feel like you were part of a conversation. If you saw a news item, you could see like, boom, oh, I see where that fits into this big, larger conversation because you're paying attention every day. Someone's writing it for you every day. So what we're trying to do is give it to you like as like what's the deal as clearly as possible. We're not speaking from nowhere. We're not trying to like write it in a boring way. We're trying to be like engaging and entertaining. We're trying to grab you. And so it's our hope is that every morning we have thousands of people wake up, they open up their email inbox, and they've got something that's punchy right there for them that speaks to what's going on right now. Either it's making sense of something that's they've seen elsewhere, or it's something entirely new they haven't heard before. But I would like to say, like, as I'm looking around the names here of people here, I recognize some of them as people who write letters to the editor. I used to run the opinion pages for the Star. And I think about this a lot, that when I was running the opinion pages, we get a lot, obviously lots and lots of letters. And I don't have the percentage off the top of my head, but a lot of them are about national politics, right? They're about Trump, or they're about the presidential election, or things like that, or stuff that's happening in Kansas or whatever. And a much smaller proportion of those letters were about things that were going on here. And so I would view the Tucson Agenda as a success if we kind of gave fodder for the letter writers, the people who write the letters to the editor. That's like where we're trying to be, like that local stuff that you find interesting that would spur you to write a letter to the editor. Like that's kind of where we want to be.
Yeah, and Curtis and I were kind of talking about this beforehand, and I think that a big part of what we're doing, like you said, is that running conversation. Is just is being there every day, kind of following up with things that we've written about in the past, connecting them to other reporting that's happening, and also just trying to save you time. Like Kurt, how much time do you spend reading every single news source in Southern Arizona every day and breaking it down to the headlines that an interested citizen should be looking at?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And it's like going through, I don't know what happened in the news business, but like the websites are terrible. And so we're just combing through these websites. And yeah, so this is what I do every morning. This is what all three of us do every morning. Is we're going through all the local news outlets trying to come up with like, well, what's the thing that you need to know today? What's the thing that's not about like, some political and national level thing, but like here, boom, here, what's going on? And so we spend a lot of time doing that. And like Hank said, like you put a lot of time into it and you come up with like 3 sentences that are worthwhile and a link to the story. But it's like the point Hank's making there is that we're trying to save you time, right? So we're trying to create something that would allow you to bypass having to do all that stuff for yourself. Like we're going to be there, boom, we know what we're talking about. We pay attention to the news, and it's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like right there. Here are the things that you need to pay attention to for the day.
And I don't think when we started, we realized that would be such a big part of what we do. But that is something that our readers find immensely useful, is just having everything kind of put into one place. Because you can spend your entire day clicking around crap on the internet, be that Twitter, Facebook, or news sites, just to kind of feel like you're in the know of what's happening in your town or your state or whatever it is you follow. And just by doing that work for you, that's a really big value add to our subscribers that we didn't realize at the outset was so necessary. Just kind of taking the whole conversation and putting it into one email. And I feel like that kind of sums up, we do a lot of original reporting. We do kind of analysis. Occasionally we venture into some commentary even. But a big part of it is just kind of making sure that people have one centralized place to feel like if I read one thing today, I have a pretty good overview of what's happening in Arizona or Tucson.
I did have kind of a preliminary question for you of my own, and that's why the newsletter format? Why Patreon? I mean, why Substack in particular? And what's the differentiator between you and other new media newsrooms like, say, Arizona Luminaria, Arizona Mirror, the Tucson Sentinel? Those other kind of digital outlets that don't have a print publication, what makes you different from them?
Curtis, you want to take the third and I'll take the first 2?
Yeah, right on.
Okay. So I've been working in the newsletter sphere for a long time. Before this job, I ran the Yellow Sheet Report, which is the Capital Times's insider daily political newsletter. It's about $300 a month. It's basically only lobbyists subscribe to it. But I've always been a really big fan of the newsletter format, in part because of what we've been talking about, that there's this kind of direct relationship to the reader. I feel like I've worked at big newspapers. I've worked at small newspapers. I much prefer the small newspapers in terms of the kind of reaction and relationship that you have with readers. I feel like I know the people who subscribe to our Substack, even though that may not technically be true. And I feel like they feel like they know us too, which is a really important part of this. A lot of journalism is kind of, I guess, faith-based, in that you have to trust the reporters that you're reading. And a lot of times people probably don't even know who exactly is writing their news. Unless you're in the news industry, I don't think it's real common practice, or you're pretty savvy about your news consumptions. I don't think it's a real practice to read the bylines and get to know people in that way and kind of look for news based on who's writing it. And I think that's one thing that like the newsletter format kind of allows us to do is build these relationships with people. And then there's also just the direct subscriber to bank account aspect in that, I've worked in news. For example, when I ran the Yellow Sheet report early on, I would track our subscription numbers. And at one point, I realized, oh, in the last year or so, I've grown this publication by about $80,000 in revenue. And I took that to our corporate overlords and I said, hey, look at all this money we've brought in. Can we give our reporters a small raise each so that they don't leave us? They laughed at me. So even when these things are going well at the corporate level, you almost never see any kind of investment back into the product, into the newsroom, into the community. And by utilizing Substack, which does a really good job of just creating a simple newsletter format or a simple newsletter tool that even people like me who don't really understand the internet all that well can use, we bypass all of the bad things about a daily newspaper. I no longer wake up in the morning and think about how are the evil corporate overlords trying to destroy my publication today. I wake up in the morning and think, what can we do to make the Arizona agenda better? And just that mental shift is incredible. It frees up so much mental space to think about the big new ideas, to think about what we could be doing rather than how things are going wrong and it's out of your control. So I think that's why the newsletter format and Substack, in part just because they took a chance on us. They put out this grant program. Frankly, I had never really read any Substacks before Rachel sent me this application for the grant. I didn't know much about it. There are a lot of newsletter providers out there, but Substack has an ethos that I generally agree with. I think what they're trying to do is cool, and I think that it is a good newsletter tool. So at least for the foreseeable future, we'll be on Substack. But that doesn't mean that, this is a forever relationship. At some point, we may just decide that we don't, there are a lot of newsletter providers out there that we could be utilizing. But really, they've made it simple. They've made it simple to subscribe. The customer service is awesome. I saw somebody in the chat was complaining about the star being too frustrating to deal with. I hear you 100%. I worked there and I could not get them to fix my subscription so I could log in. It was insane. And Substack doesn't have those kinds of problems. They're really good about the customer relationship. So, and then Curtis, I'll let you take the second half of that question.
Yeah, so like what differentiates us from the other outlets in town is actually, before I get into that completely, I just want to piggyback a little bit on what Hank said. Like the sensation of working for the Tucson Agenda versus working for a corporate newspaper, it's profound. It's rather than have like all this weight of something that used to be needed, the structure that used to be needed when the operation was enormous, that's now kind of just like caving in on itself. I feel like we kind of like jumped into the future where all of that has collapsed and now we're starting over. So what do we want this to be? What do you want the news landscape to be? So it's just remarkable. The mental state every day is just so much more positive and so much more creative. So in terms of like how we differentiate ourselves, is one of the things that we're doing is like it's a daily dose, right? It's that running coherent conversation that you don't really see from the other outlets. So you have like the Arizona Daily Star, right? They have their reporters who are covering local government, but they're kind of like they report like every couple of days or once a week or whatever, and they are like very entrenched in like traditional news media reporting. So it's kind of like an impersonal voice. And you have to kind of like read between the lines to see like what the deal is. Why is this like important? And then you have like say the Tucson Sentinel, which they do a lot of reporting, but they're kind of like trying to recreate the newspaper online. Is kind of like more or less what I see them trying to do. We're not trying to do that, right? We're trying to give you like original reporting, curated, boom, like prepare you for the day and keep you apprised of what's going on with the local government. Like the Luminaria, they seem to specialize more in like the in-depth reporting about like specific topics, but they're not giving you that like daily dose of what your elected officials are doing. Let's see, who else do we have around town?
Arizona Public Media.
Oh yeah, Arizona Public Media, right? Definitely, they do a lot of reporting, but their reporting seems to be geared more towards like their like minute and a half or however long radio spots, right? So they're like giving you the audio, giving you the gist of what's going on. We have much more space to write than they do, right? So their stories are real short like that. If you print them out, ours are like a lot longer. And do we have anybody else around town?
Well, statewide, we have Arizona Mirror, we have
Yeah.
the Copper Courier. There's a couple of very conservative ones that are clearly propaganda, but those are more kind of straight ahead reporting.
Yeah. So take the example of the Arizona Mirror. It's like they're very state government focused, right? So they can give you a lot of reporting about state government, but they're not going to tell you what the Tucson City Council is doing or anything like that. So that's just a clear boom. We're just on a much more local level than them.
And I would also say, like, we are subscriber funded, not donor funded. And that makes a big difference in the way that we think about issues, we report issues, and we present ourselves even. I am not necessarily... A lot of the nonprofit journalism world is proving to your donors that you are making a difference. And that takes a whole lot of time from the nonprofit organizations. You'll see a story about a thing, and then 4 stories about the story about the thing and the impact that the story had. And that's what happens a lot when you're trying to find constantly new funders, new donors. And we launched this as a journalism first operation. We luckily had the funds to ensure it would survive for a year and didn't really have to think about where's our money coming from. And frankly, didn't expect it to survive beyond that first year. So never really came up with those additional revenue streams that, a proper news organization might have. But I think that's been wholly beneficial for us. We show up and do the journalism and let the chips fall where they may, both in our coverage and in our funding. And so far, that has worked out amazingly for us. We don't need a $50,000 grant, a $100,000 grant from somebody who frankly wants something in return for that money. What we need is 1,000 people to pony up $100 a year to subscribe and pay for news that they like reading. And then we remain wholly independent of influence from donors, from foundations, from all those other kind of revenue streams that get really complicated, especially in smaller newsrooms. So we don't answer to corporate overlords. We don't answer to donors. We answer to our subscribers. And I think that's one of the big differences between the Arizona Agenda and a lot of the other really great news organizations. I don't mean to not knock the nonprofits or whatever, but we are different. We do things differently than them, and we're happy with that.
I would add another thing here is like, I think I don't know how many people actually do read the Tucson Agenda, but like, if you do, what you get is you open it up and we are immediately trying to tell you what the deal is. And you're not searching among a bunch of crap on a screen to find what the news is. We're not throwing these ads that autoplay, like all this stuff, all this garbage that is just like, it inundates you as you're trying to read what they're saying. It's just like the news. I mean, it's just right there, like immediately from the first word right there, boom, 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 boom. You spend your 5 minutes on it and you're done. But we put up like 0 obstacles to you reading the news, which I see all over news outlet like websites. It's just like it's like they make it difficult for you to read the news. And so ours is completely clear that it's direct. It's right there, immediate.
Yeah, there is something to say about not having pop-ups, like those autoplay videos I find on every TV station, and now the Republic too. Those are horrific.
Yeah.
I see another couple of names going up here. I think I
Would
figured
you
out.
like
So I'm
would you like to answer some questions?
Sure.
yeah, sure.
Okay,
I'll
great.
just click ask all to unmute and see how that works.
All, well,
Well, under the hand raised portion, I hope it was just the 3 or 4 that are
yeah,
on there. But
the folks who are raising their hand, they got the system figured out.
okay,
Uh,
okay.
Good afternoon, Lillian. Could you unmute and share your question?
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
Yep.
Okay. I don't completely understand what your intent is. And so I have some specific questions. I used to follow TUSD religiously, and it's like a full-time job to do that. And the Star always had really great education reporters who covered TUSD well. And I never had time for city council and the county supervisors. And I'd like to read news about those places, and I would like it a lot if you covered TUSD, because there's so much that goes on there that's needs to be, the public needs to be informed about. Are you going to do that kind of thing, or if I misunderstood what you're doing?
Lillian, I miss getting your TUSD emails, by the way.
Well, I had to take a break from TUSD because it's crazy making, but I'm slowly getting back into it.
You are the watchdog this town needs. Thank you for your service.
Covering TUSD is 100% like in our domain, 100%. As you pointed out, it is a full-time job to cover TUSD. So we got to figure out how we're going to do it so that we don't sink all of our time into writing that. How do we get it so that we are giving you what you need to understand what TUSD is doing, while still being able to cover all those other things? Because it's just, there's two of us, right? So we got to be very mindful of how we spend our time. But TUSD, absolutely, 100%. Sunnyside, all of them, they're all, that's our meat and potatoes. That's what we want to cover.
Okay, is that good, Lillian? Any other questions?
I was just going to mention Steve Kozachik's newsletter is a wonderful source of news that you might want to subscribe to his newsletter.
Yeah, we subscribe to all the politicians' newsletters. All right, all the county departments, all the city departments. Essentially, if you are a local elected official or you are, anything official locally, we are subscribing to your newsletter. We have this flow of information coming at us every day. But you're absolutely right. Steve K's newsletter is,
I think is worthwhile.
That reminds me, Lillian, you had sent me a copy of Steve's newsletter not too long ago, and there was a great piece in there about local newsletters, and I had a great thought that I think we're going to put an intern on, just kind of rounding up, the headline I have in mind is what I learned about Tucson from reading neighborhood newsletters. And it came out of this. Steve K had mentioned that they were working on creating some funding to put out print versions of a couple of neighborhood newsletters. It was just a small item in one of his newsletters. But that gave me a really good idea that I think will be a really fun piece for our intern at the Tucson Agenda this semester to tackle. So please keep sending whatever you find out there, Lillian. I really do. I love your emails, and I miss them on the TUSD beat. But I realize you have to take a break sometimes. Mental health.
Yes.
Amen. Larry, we have your hand up, and share your question, please.
Yes, I just wanted to say I'm a founding subscriber to the Arizona Agenda and the Tucson Agenda. And I'm speaking up because school boards across Tucson are under attack by the Republican Party. In fact, in my own neighborhood, the Catalina Foothills School District is a key target of the Pima County GOP. The Pima County GOP is threatening to disrupt the September 12th meeting of the school board. And I wanted to find out if this is the kind of thing that you would cover.
Yeah, we got your email about that, Larry. Kurt and I were just talking about it earlier today, but I don't know what the plan is. So
it's definitely the type of thing that we would cover. We wrote a couple weeks ago, I don't remember exactly, about the last training session that they were setting up to disrupt the meeting. And that was honestly, that was such an enjoyable thing to write. I went back and watched some of the meetings from earlier in the year, and there's just like all these great young people who are just really like they walk up to the podium and they stand up for what they believe in. And so I just basically just quoted a bunch of them. This upcoming thing right here, that's on our radar. I'm not sure what we'll do with it, but it definitely is like in the pot for like potential what we would write about.
I just bring
And
it up
that
because
Catalina,
the parents are all in touch with me and they're completely alarmed about their September 12th meeting being disrupted.
Mhm.
there's a lot of weird stuff going on up there for like
Yeah.
a wealthy, well-to-do school district. They have some weird politics going on there.
hmm And it seems to be like the premise that the disruptors, so to speak, are operating under is that the school district is failing somehow. But I don't see any indication that it is in fact failing. So there's like they kind of built like a rhetorical house of cards that's going to eventually cave in on itself.
Okay, Paul, you have a question.
Indeed, I do. And Hank and Kurt, the first thing I read, my 2 hours of news reading every day as a political director for my union and working closely with AFL, is the agenda.
That's amazing. Thank you. We're writing too long if it takes you 2 hours, though, Paul.
Yeah.
No, brother, the start of my 2 hours, and I love what Kurt said, is the best 5 minutes. Because honestly, if I can't get to the yellow sheet, I absolutely get through the agenda. So having said that, though, and I had a question in the chat, but you guys have answered that. We have the AFL-CIO for Arizona has the Arizona Labor Dispatch. This is hot strike summer. And the hard thing we have facing us for working people as we bargain for the common good, you guys know that, right? At the state level, municipal level, how will you guys help working families finally have a frame, a narrative frame, and a news source other than the Chamber of Commerce, which controls the majority of our corporate media? Will we see a difference? I mean, how do you guys frame that now that you've kind of freed yourself from the corporate choke collar? And that's not an exaggeration.
So, do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead.
All right. So, that's an interesting question, right? Because we are like approaching this as in like we want like regular people, right? The people who live in Tucson, Pima County, as a whole, we want them to know what their elected officials are doing, right? So we're not geared specifically towards like labor, right? As in how to inform, people involved in labor. But it just, I think, will, as a matter of course, help, working families understand what their elected officials are doing, because we're just going to be telling you all the time. I personally, I'm a fan of unions, like I'm a fan of people being able to like not just be crushed by the most powerful people in society in whatever form that takes. I'm great, but I don't know about like being specifically, and I don't think you're necessarily asking this, but like being specifically aligned with like the labor movement. I would shy away from that. I want us to be free to write about whatever we want. But I think that what we do is just really good and valuable, and it's valuable to everybody. So I think it'll be valuable to people in the labor movement. If that is your question, I might have veered, but
I was going to say something really similar that, like this is a very informed audience we've got here. All of you guys are either, political hobbyists or professionals in this industry. And this is, you guys are our bread and butter as far as people who subscribe. Thank you so much. But also, like, if we only reach Democrats of Greater Tucson, then we have not only like financially failed, but we've failed in our mission of like bringing average people into this. So like our goal is to take your neighbor who knows nothing about politics or whoever, pick your example, and give them the tools to become you. At least in terms of like how much they understand what's going on. And that's a process, it probably took most of you many years of studying this stuff to know what you know nowadays. But I think that just having that kind of daily conversation, like Kurt said, the coherent, ongoing, here's what's happening today and how it relates to that thing we talked about last month, and also watch for this coming up in a month. Whereas like the newspapers, you'll get a here's what happened today, and very rarely even a why does that matter to you. So we at least always try to have that why does that matter to you. And to kind of piggyback off what Kurt said is like, we're in an interesting space of not quite being newspaper reporters in that like our language, our writing style is not Associated Press style objectivity. We've been, working in this industry in these towns our entire adult lives. We've built up somewhat of an expertise on these things, and without being, partisan hacks, we'd like to explain to you in plain English what this all means and why it matters. And that means going a step beyond what we were allowed to do at normal newspapers. That kind of who cares? There's a reason that's left out of corporate newspapers, and that's because it's going to piss somebody off. So by by our very nature, we have limited our audience. We do not get a lot of MAGA subscribers, but we do get a fair amount of like the Chamber of Commerce types who either, kind of hate read us just to see what we're writing about, or, like a somewhat different perspective. I've found myself aligning with more conservative Republicans in the last couple of years because they are so frustrated with what's happening with their party, with what's happening with this country. And that's really nice to see that, when we start talking about the fate of democracy, as many of our conversations have been hinged around over the last couple of years, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a straight down the line partisan thing. Unfortunately, far too often it is. And we're not afraid to say that. But so I think there's, kind of this interesting line that we're trying to walk or dance along about where are we in terms of objectivity? And to us, we basically fall on the, we're not partisans. We're a no bullshit operation. So if the Democrats are spewing bullshit, we will say so. That happens far less than us having to call out the Republicans, though, I'll say.
Okay. Let's see, we've got Barbara Warren, and then we're going to shift to Mike Bryan. Looks like he might have some questions in the chat room. So Barbara, go ahead.
Hi, we have some very seasoned, excellent journalists in this town who are doing their own thing or freelancing or whatever. Are you interested in, and do you have the ability to bring on any of those people for paid work with your paper organization?
Let me take that one.
Oh, go for it.
Yes. Especially right now. Look, I'm trying to hire somebody to replace the irreplaceable Rachel Langang at the Arizona Agenda. I kind of had a thing worked out, I thought, and fell apart at the last minute through nobody's fault. So right now I am drowning under the weight of not only putting out a daily newsletter, but just kind of trying to run this organization and, do things like this to help us grow. So I am really looking for freelancers. Right? I'm also looking for a full-time hire, but in the meantime, I am looking for freelancers, and I'm sure Tucson would be also, love to have a little bit more diversity of voices, but it's also a matter of paying people, and they've got to kind of hit sustainable and get their own, get their flow under control before they start shelling out for freelancers. But I have, the Arizona Agenda has money to spend on freelancers right now. Especially right now. So if anyone's interested, if you know anyone good, it's, got to fit what we're doing. It's got to make sense, but I am 100% open to pitches. So if anyone in this Zoom is working on a good project, please get in touch. Or if you know somebody who's a freelancer who we just haven't reached out to yet, please send them our way. I'm looking for all the help we can find.
Yeah,
Reach
Great.
you. How do we reach you?
Oh, I'm sorry, Hank at ArizonaAgenda.com. And I'll put it in the chat before we hang
Awesome.
up, and just links to the website and stuff too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and for the Tucson agenda, I think Hank hit it right. Like, we really would like to do that. We don't have the money right now necessarily to do that. But, long term is we don't want it to get boring that you all are just reading what I write and what Caitlin writes. It's good to spice it up. So we definitely would like to have, other voices in there.
Great. And then we're going to go to Mike Bryan and then Jim Hanley. You there, Mike? Well, looks like we're going to go to Jim Hanley. So you can unmute yourself.
Thanks very much. That's really exciting what you're doing. I have a little bit of background in newspapers. I worked for the New Times and for the Arizona Daily Wildcat selling display advertising. And so I know something about that business model that depends on display advertising for its revenue. And I do not think that that model allows for true independent journalism, because the advertisers, the editors, the managers did not want to offend the advertisers. And if it was aggregated into like the Chamber of Commerce, we're not going to get very unbiased reporting on labor issues, for instance. My question is about an editor. I guess there's two of you writing right now. Is there a need for an editor in journalism? Are you finding there is no need? Do you serve as the editor for each other? So that's what I'd like to know about what you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. So, Hank, you got it.
Well, considering I had 2 typos in today's email, yeah, I'll take this one. And that's the great joy of the newsletter is I've gotten now 6 texts, emails, whatevers about the 2 typos. And like I've fixed them after the first one, but nobody's going to see it fixed because it's in your inbox as originally published. But so yeah, you still need editors. And I've hired a person who I trust, who's fantastic. We all miss a thing or two occasionally. But her name is Tracy Townsend. I worked with her at the Capital Times for, I don't know, 8 years, and she was there for probably 20 years. Just as a freelance kind of last gut check on, legal issues, as a last set of eyes to kind of edit things. But I think, really what we're finding is the best editing is when we're aggressively editing each other. And then, kind of handing it off to a final person, because you cannot edit yourself. That is just a fact of life. I can read the same paragraph 10 times and it's what I wrote in my head, but on paper, it may not be. So just having another final set of eyes on things is crucial before things go out. And also just having the ability to kind of back up and think about big picture. Is this, early on, is this what we wanted to say about this? Is this, story forming the way we wanted? So I think right now we've settled on a system that works for the most part, which is, editing each other for the big picture stuff. Does this fit our format? Is this, correct? Is this making the points we want to make? Is it well written? And then just still we have to pay out to have a separate set of eyes for their typos, are there errors, those kinds of things that a writer cannot see for themselves. So it's been a learning curve, and we've had to eventually, kind of beef up what we do for the editing front, in part just because of those stupid typos. If you have a typo on a newspaper story, 10 people are going to see it. The first 10 who click on there, and maybe one of them is going to notify you, and then you can fix it. And the next 10 people who click on that story won't see the typo. We do not have that luxury, unfortunately. So it is pretty important that things go out as clean as possible. And that doesn't always, there's going to be typos, but we try to keep it to typos and not errors.
Yeah. And so for myself and for Caitlin too, I think we moved from newspaper writing into newsletter writing, which is a different beast. So there was a steep learning curve for us to figure out how do you actually write this thing. because it's much more conversational. It's much more direct. You're including like images to, you know, break up the text, things like that. So we leaned on Hank quite a bit, you know, especially early on, to just kind of be like, is that how it's supposed to be, you know? But I want just to get into the editor thing is, oh my God, yeah. I would not trust any writer in the world who thinks that they don't need an editor. That is foolish. Like, you have to like do your best, and then you have to hand it off to somebody who is either going to rip it apart or tweak it or whatever. But you just cannot be like objective about your own writing, especially when you like pour yourself into it. You need somebody to be like, I don't understand what you're trying to say here. Like, what is this? You know? So we kind of like have created kind of like an editing team amongst ourselves, and also, you know, to try to reach out to people who can edit for us.
Okay, well, let's go to Mike Bryan and see if there's any questions in the chat room.
I haven't seen any questions in the chat room that haven't been voiced. Looks like no reviewing.
Oh,
I
I
don't
see one
any,
here.
but yeah,
There's something from Tori here that says conversations are usually two-way. Talking about the daily conversation. Do you want readers to reply to your emails? Will their replies affect your decisions about what you write? Blah 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 blah. Yeah, totally. We've tried, and this is something that kind of I have to keep reminding myself to do. But we've tried to use, like, Substack has a comments feature, but more than that, they have a threads feature where essentially you can just kind of pose questions to your audience, and rather than it coming out in a newsletter format, it comes out in kind of an old chat format, and those are really fun. We've tried to do those at least quarterly, where we just kind of ask broad, open-ended questions about, what do you want to see? You know, what aren't we covering? Those kinds of things. And I'm always amazed at the kind of responses we get. And that's partly because we have a really smart audience, you know, but we get great tips, we get great feedback. The other day, for example, I wrote just a little something that was like talking about the Daily Sun in Tucson, or I'm sorry, in Flagstaff, got bought by WIC Communications from Lee. Lee is one of the worst newspaper companies in the country. WIC Communications, Kurt and I have both worked for them. They're a newspaper company, meaning that they're bad, but not the worst. And so I wrote something essentially saying that, you know, like, hey, this may actually be good news. And then I heard from a couple of reporters who work for WIC being like, you know, they're furloughing us all so that they can save the money to buy this new newspaper, right? And so that's tomorrow's edition. So yeah, we do take feedback from our, you know, the best tips come from our readers, the best feedback. Sometimes I'll write something and get a really strong, you know, pushback from our readers, and I'll say, you're wrong, you know, whatever. But most of the time, like, it's really thoughtful, it's correct. When people call me out, I stop and think about it, because, you know, as much as there's that knee-jerk reaction of like, I'm right, most of the time I'm not. So if I get a lot of, you know, responses to something, either good or bad, I know that I've touched a nerve, and that's, you know, that's nice to know. And you do see that. I mean, this goes back to the relationship with readers. At a daily paper, all you get is an onslaught of hate mail, you know? And so, like, that, at some point you tune that stuff out. I stopped answering, and I have a practice of trying to answer every single email. But when I worked at the Daily Star, for example, I stopped. Had to. That would have been all I did all day, is answering crazy people's emails. But with Substack, you know, everybody who's there has opted to be there. So you get this really, like, kind of cool give and take with the readership. And not everyone likes everything I write, or, you know, whatever. But I think that there's kind of a built up relationship, for lack of better words, where people feel comfortable telling you you're wrong, and where I feel comfortable listening to the idea that I'm wrong, because it's not in all caps screamed at me 100 times a day.
Okay, great.
Thanks
great.
from Victoria for diving into her question there in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
My question is, you guys have your ear to the ground every day. What do you expect to be kind of the big stories that you're going to be following on a regular basis over the next couple of months in your respective beats?
So yeah, I mean, so right in Tucson we have elections, right? They're kind of, they feel like foregone conclusions, right? I just don't see much change happening in these elections. But we do have propositions. We do have school bonds, the elections that are going out. And that's something that I would love to really dig into. I am always attracted to the things that like kind of come off as boring, but I'm like, that actually would be really interesting. And that's going to, if they pass those bonds, that's going to be a real impact on people's lives. Like, I think I want to get into that. I also am like, I am very much looking forward to covering the legislature from Tucson. When I was the opinion editor, people would bring this up all the time, is that we just don't get a lot of coverage of the legislature. And like, it's kind of like, Howard Fisher writes for the, Capitol Media Services through the Star. And so he'll write about like weird bills and sometimes lawsuits and things like that. But it's kind of, he's trying to tailor it for the Tucson audience. What I would like to be doing is covering our legislators, who we've elected and sent there. What are they doing? Are they representing, what we hired them to do? But then also, like, we have different issues in Tucson than we do in Phoenix or in Flagstaff or from wherever. And so, what are those? For example, water, right? That's a great one. I guess that all affects everybody, but we handle water differently than other areas of the state. So take issues that are of local importance. How are those being discussed? What are the things the actions the legislature is trying to take that would affect those? So I would like to kind of like integrate Tucson into the statewide conversation about the legislature.
Great. Let's we're going to go to Susie Anderson and then the Lillian Fox. Susie.
Hi, Kurt. I loved reading the letters to the editor when you were editor. You had a great variety, and those I agree with and those I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you see as happening with chat and AI and all of those things as far as news operations reporting?
Well, I just got to say, I had not thought of this before, but how people use Chat GPT to write letters to the editor. Oh man.
Oh, do they?
I'm glad I'm not editor
anymore.
Oh man, that's going to be across the country. People are going to use AI to submit letters to the editor. Oh, that's amazing. But in terms of like reporting,
Yeah.
You know what? I don't really know. I think Hank has dabbled in this much more than me. I think he'd probably answer it better than me.
So I tried to get ChatGPT to write a whole edition of the Arizona Agenda, partly because I'm terrified that that's what's going to happen in the future anyway, and partly because I wanted the day off.
What did you write about? What was the subject of that?
Oh, I think I had I had it write the entire email, but for the top, I had it. Carrie Lake had just put out her book with this insane like dream sequence where she got kidnapped by Stephen Richer and Bill Gates, the supervisor here, and whatever. The whole thing was crazy. So I gave that to ChatGPT and I said, I want you to write a story just like this, but reimagine it where Stephen Richer is the one getting kidnapped and it's about his defamation lawsuit. And it did a pretty good job with that, honestly. It was pretty funny. But then I had it I fed it, kind of the other news stuff that we do, which is, I took, the story from the Republic about the thing Governor Hobbs did today. And I told ChatGPT, read the agenda. This is our format. This is how we write things. I want you to take this story, put it into this format. And that's where I thought ChatGPT would actually be really useful. I thought it could do that job. It cannot. Luckily for us, it'll be another 6 months before it wipes out all of our jobs, at least. It can, that's what AI is best at, summarizing, right? It can take a long thing, put it into bullet points for you. But a lot of what gets lost in there is what we provide, which is background knowledge, context, history, connections between different things. So it could pretty accurately summarize a story in 2 sentences, but it wasn't right. One, it wasn't actually right. Like technically, it would make errors, and quite a few of them. And then two, it lacked any kind of nuance, any kind of humor, any kind of reason that we would write the thing. We try to take the things that matter, summarize it real quick so you know that it happened, and kind of provide the link if somebody else is covering it so that you can go read more, but also kind of put it in the context of, okay, so why do you care about this? And ChatGPT just failed at that. But I do think that there's a lot of things that we can be using AI for. And these, I'm working with a developer on a separate project that I'm going to announce in a little bit here. Not necessarily a journalistic thing, but I've got real smart tech people around me right now, and I've been asking them, like, so one of the things I really want to do is create a master political calendar. Blog for Arizona does a great job on Democratic events in Tucson. Like there's Republican Briefs in Maricopa County that does a great job for the Republican events up here, but there's nothing kind of holistic in Arizona. And one of the things I'm working on right now is, can we get tools to scrape government websites and kind of input events into a spreadsheet so that I can use that as a calendar? And you can, but unfortunately, every government website is really different. There's no standardization there, so you have to create a different scraper for every website. But I think in the future, like those kinds of things, this is what I hope AI becomes: tools. Not replacing humans, but replacing the boring things that humans have to do, the labor intensive crap that humans are not good at, creating spreadsheets, those kinds of things, to enable us to do better reporting faster, to have more kind of tools and resources at our fingertips, rather than have your news written by a machine that has never and can never visit Tucson, So who knows? Maybe it'll all turn into just the sad dystopian future that we fear. But there's another world where, this actually makes your local reporting better because your local journalists are smarter. They have more time freed up. They have, more tools at their disposal to keep track of more things at the same time. And that's where I hope it goes.
Yeah, I remember like 10 years ago when I covered high school sports for the Nogales International, that some of the coaches with the teams would have something called, I think it was called home plate. But what it was is the coach would sit there and log, like single, to second base or whatever, blah, strikeout, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of it, they could just, press do it or whatever it was. And the application would spit out like a story of what happened in the game. And it had all the problems that Hank mentioned, where it was just kind of like, it doesn't even really sound like a story, but it was all there. So for the local reporting thing is, I would love it if we could have like the Tucson City Council meetings that last 5 hours. If we could have some type of AI that would like take it, create a transcript out of it, and be able to spit out like more or less like what happened in the meeting, that would be really useful. I would still have to go back and watch it, to make sure it was accurate and all that. But those types of things, those time-saving tools, that would be a huge benefit to local reporting for everywhere. It would be awesome.
Absolutely. Well, Lillian, you have the final question.
Let's see. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I'm using a different version of Zoom, and it's confusing to me right now. I belong to an organization that wants to do a much better job of publicizing itself. We have some advantages you don't have because we have a great physical location. You don't have a physical location. What's your strategy for letting people know that you exist?
Just show up to the Democrats of Greater Tucson every time you guys invite us. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that is it. To like accept the invitation and go and talk. Like that's how we start spreading it out. But we also are hoping that like our readers are going to think that what we're doing is good, and they'll share it with their friends, like, forward the email to somebody else, that type of thing. Like we're really we're trying to reach out as much as we can, but we're also like trying to do the best job that we can, and we're kind of hoping that that will, do the job of drumming up more business for us.
Okay,
And
so we all need to help you.
if you can each find us 10 subscribers, we will be sustainable tomorrow. And,
Absolutely.
but I'll kind of piggybacking off Curtis what Curtis was saying. The Arizona Agenda is at about 10,000 subscribers now in 2 years without having spent a single penny on advertising. And that is pretty incredible. I know, Axios has a Axios Phoenix now, and they have spent millions on advertising their product. And, I'm not trying to say anything bad about them, but it's been, millions spent. And I know their subscriber numbers, and they're better than ours for sure, but not by millions magnitude. So we've gone really, really far off of just showing up, putting out the best publication we can and hoping for the best. And luckily, like, our readers have, been more than readers, they're supporters, they're boosters. And that's what we really need. But also, we're kind of looking at the future and thinking, oh, look at that. We've got money for an advertising budget now. So figuring that out in the future, where does it make the most sense to spend those dollars, and how can we put a little bit of money into growth on this operation? I think is kind of where we're at now. I see, Paul, you have a question about group subscriptions. We do, as long as we're here, we do offer group subscriptions at a steep discount. Happy to talk to anyone about, if you've got 10 or more people that you want to put on a list, we've got a deal for that. I'll also just throw up a code, or maybe I'll send it to, I know we're kind of wrapping up here, but maybe I can send it to Michael or Larry, and they can send it out as an offer to all the Democrats of Greater Tucson. But I can even set up just a discount link on there. Just if anyone's kind of thinking about testing the waters, we'll take 25% off or something like that.
Great idea.
So,
Great.
yeah.
Well, Andrea has got the final question of the day. So, Andrea.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you guys for doing this. It's very important. Can I send you $10 a month?
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's
Okay.
Yep, that would be great. We have, our subscription rates are $12 a month, I think, for both publications, but it's also, we do $120 a year for, so that comes out to $10. Or I'll, send out this discount code, and that will probably put it at, I think, 25% off of $12 is $9. Look at me mathing in real time. So you could even pay $9. I'll set it up at 25% subscription discount and just send it out to everyone here.
Oh, awesome. That'd be great. Well, we promised a lively discussion, and our guests certainly delivered, as well as everyone on Democrats of Greater Tucson today. So let's give them a big round of applause, and we really appreciate your being here. A lot of great food for thought. I saw a quote for today's presentation that journalism is merely history's first draft. So I thought that was a great quote to salute you both and all the wonderful Democrats of Greater Tucson. So have a great week, and we will see you next week at the Democrats of Greater Tucson.
All right. Thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks a lot.
very welcome.